This week on The Watchman, 9/11, 15 years later. Where do America and Israel stand today in the fight against radical Islam? And are we winning? Colonel Oliver North and Dr. Sebastian Gorka join us to break it down.
This is an existential threat perpetrated by an ideology called radical Islamic jihad.
Plus, we get an exclusive look at how the Israeli military is fighting back against cyber terrorism. It's The Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel, only on TBN. And welcome to The Watchman. Well, it is hard to believe that it's been 15 years since 9/11. It was a day that quite literally changed the course of American and world history. Islamic terrorists had made clear their intentions to attack America long before September 11, 2001. They had already struck American interest in places like Africa and Yemen, not to mention the first World Trade Center bombing during the 1990s. But 9/11 was an absolute game changer, the deadliest terror attack in U.S. history, and really the beginning of a long struggle with radical Islam that continues to this day and is only getting more difficult. Osama bin Laden is dead, but Al-Qaeda, the terror group behind 9/11, is still alive and active in countries throughout the world. At the same time, we have ISIS, arguably the most powerful and influential Islamic terrorist organization the world has ever seen. Now, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, both Sunni, are just one wing of the global jihad that is being waged against Israel and the West. The other wing is led by Shiite Iran and its proxy Hezbollah. These two wings of terror are in frequent conflict with one another, particularly in Syria. But they can all agree on one thing: America and Israel must be destroyed. So, with the 15-year anniversary of 9/11 upon us, we want to use today's show to assess where we stand in the long struggle against radical Islam and how we can win this war. We're joined by two of the world's leading experts on terrorism and the Middle East, Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North and Dr. Sebastian Gorka, both men frequent guests on Fox News. We'll also take a look at what Israel is doing to combat an increasingly dangerous facet of this war: cyber terrorism. And folks, make no mistake, as we've told you many times here at Christians United for Israel, this is a war. President Obama may not think so, but our enemies did not get the memo. They are fanatical, committed, and ruthless. I recently sat down with Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North at our 11th annual CUFI Washington Summit, where he was a guest speaker. He had some sobering analysis of where we stand in this fight and what needs to be done to achieve victory. Take a look.
If we're going to defeat the threat that is confronting us today, and it's not just taking down a school somewhere or protecting people at a convention or stopping an attack on a shopping mall. This is a much bigger threat. This is existential to the United States. The greatest terror institution in the world is the government in Tehran. The government in Tehran is building nuclear weapons with the help of the North Koreans and the means of delivering them. So this is not just a matter of, it's a police operation in San Bernardino or a nightclub in Orlando. This is an existential threat perpetrated by an ideology called radical Islamic jihad. All right? And it doesn't just stop with a terror institution of one cell here or a self-radicalized person there. This is a national catastrophe that's about to happen. How do you stop it? There's two things that have to happen. One, three, I guess. You got to recognize the threat for what it is. Number two, you got to be prepared to address it both militarily and, if you will, counter ideology. We didn't have any trouble calling Adolf Hitler a fascist Nazi. We didn't have any trouble calling the Stalinists commies. We have a terrible, difficult time of saying this is radical Islamic jihad. If we're going to take it on, we have to destroy their safe havens, wherever they are. When all this started, there was one big safe haven. It's called Raqqa in Syria. Today, here 4 years on, we now have safe havens in over 40 countries. The last leg of this whole thing is to counter the ideology. How is it that you've got people in Raqqa who are better at social media than we are in the US government, or willing to use it? See, the great unwillingness is, well, we can't put out propaganda, we can't describe how bad this is, we can't tell people who these enemies really are. If that persists, doesn't matter what happens to Raqqa, it will continue to be a major threat to the United States, to Israel, to those things that we consider most dear. And I got skin in the game. I got 17 grandkids. I want, like Abraham wanted, for his children and his grandchildren to do what God wanted to do, spread throughout the world, right? Well, I want mine to do that too. And if we don't stand up and fight back, if we don't do it the smart way, they don't have a chance. And that really bothers me, because I've known a lot of guys who put their lives on the line. I've known a lot of families who've lost a loved one fighting this terrible scourge. I've been over there for 15 and a half years watching it happen. And they've given their lives and their limbs, and they deserve better than what they've gotten from Washington.
They don't come smarter or tougher than our good friend Colonel Oliver North. Now, folks, don't let this get you discouraged or upset. The Bible says we're not to have a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. God is in control. But the Bible also says my people perish for lack of knowledge. And our team here at Christians United for Israel believes you would rather know than not know about the threats we are facing. That's why we're so excited to be joined today by Dr. Sebastian Gorka. He's one of the world's top experts on terrorism and national security, and author of the New York Times best-selling book, Defeating Jihad. He joined us recently to discuss the keys to victory in this struggle. It's been 15 years since 9/11. Hard to believe. Where are we in this struggle against radical Islam? Are we winning, losing, making any gains, taking losses? Where does the U.S. and the Western world stand right now?
Sad to say we're losing this war, Eric. If you look at the last 15 years, we've actually seen this threat metastasize into what it is today, which is the Islamic State. The Islamic State, which recently the National Counterterrorism Center of the United States briefed the President of America, saying that ISIS now has this is the quote they used, fully functional affiliates in 18 nations around the world. 2 years ago, State Department said they had 7 fully operational affiliates around the world. It has doubled in less than 2 years. Al-Qaeda was responsible for 9/11, the greatest, deadliest terrorist attack in modern history, but ISIS makes Al-Qaeda look like the real JV team. ISIS has at least 80,000 jihadis. It holds territory in multiple countries, Iraq, Syria, Libya. It has affiliates in places like Nigeria. Boko Haram is now part of the caliphate. So if you look at all the metrics, whether it's the money they make, how many fighters they have, how widespread they are, we're losing this war.
Yeah. How deep, in your great book, Defeating Jihad, Dr. Gorka, you talk about the ISIS penetration of the West, ISIS, its sympathizers. How deep is this penetration in the U.S. and in Europe?
ISIS declared the caliphate end of June 2014. If you look at the last 2 years, we have killed or arrested, the latest arrest was in Virginia just a few days ago, 109 people in America linked to ISIS. Not 9, not 29, 109 people that are linked to ISIS or are inspired by ISIS. The war is real and it's here. It's not just something happening in Mesopotamia or happening, on the streets of Tel Aviv. It is right here in America as well.
Does the average American understand and grasp the severity of this threat in their own backyard? In general, radical Islam, the jihadist threat, Twofold question, actually. Does the average American get it, and do our leaders get it 15 years after 9/11?
Right. I think we have to make a positive conclusion that the average American is more and more understanding that there's a problem. They look at San Bernardino, they look at Orlando, and they understand something isn't working right. When it comes to federal government, we are in trouble. We have an administration that is willfully distorting the facts. 5 years ago, the White House told in an unclassified memo the then Attorney General and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the most senior ranking US military officer, when you do counterterrorism training in America for the military or the FBI, you cannot mention religion, especially Islam, and words like jihad are forbidden. That would be as if during World War II, somebody said in the White House, don't use the word Nazi because a German could become offended. It's almost like an SNL skit. It's frighteningly in its absurdity. And then what do we have? It gets worse. In Orlando, what do we have? We have a cabinet member, the Attorney General, currently, who, when they released the transcripts of Omar Mateen calling the 911 dispatcher, decides to censor them, to delete reference to the word Islam, the Islamic State or Caliphate, as if whiting out those words changes the reality. So no, unfortunately, Eric, DC, Washington doesn't get it.
Folks, this is the kind of in-depth information you're not going to hear anywhere else. You see the information there on your screen. Visit cufi.org or call the number to join the movement and get informed. Up next, more with Dr. Gorka. It's the Watchman, it's CUFI, only right here on TBN. Stick around. The Bible is clear. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob made an everlasting covenant with the land and the people of Israel. They are the apple of his eye. But Israel faces enemies on all sides who want to annihilate every Jewish man, woman, and child.
God gave us a voice and a responsibility, a biblical mandate to bless Israel and to speak up for Zion's sake. Find out how when you order my free book, Why Christians Should Support Israel.
You'll learn why Israel has a biblical and historic claim to the land, why Christians owe the Jewish people a spiritual debt, what the Bible says about those who bless and curse the Jewish people. There's no time to lose. Call Christians United for Israel at the number on your screen or go to cufi.org/book and we'll send you your free book from Pastor John Hagee. If you won't speak up for Israel, who will? Talk about Israel's place in all of this right now.
What is their role or what is the bigger picture? I can do no better than to quote the Prime Minister himself when Bibi Netanyahu addressed Congress, I think, 2 years ago. He said, if you want to understand ISIS, if you want to understand the maelstrom that is the Middle East, because it's not just about Iraq or Syria, he said, you must understand that all of this is simply a game of thrones for the crown of the caliphate. That's probably the best one-sentence summary I've heard of the last 2.5 years of catastrophe. Why? Because we have two competing visions of the caliphate. On the one hand, we have the Sunni extremists, Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who want to have a Sunni-controlled caliphate and have actually established one in Syria and Iraq. On the other hand, what do we have? It's not just one pole. The other pole is Iran. We have the Shia side of this. They also have been exporting their fundamental version of Islam since 1979, and they wish to have their own caliphate, albeit under the control of the mullahs. So what we have right now is a competing vision of two different versions of Islam vying for control of the Middle East, and both of them with utter hatred for Israel.
The Sunni wing, led by ISIS today in many ways, and the Shia wing, represented by Iran, Hezbollah.
Right.
Approaches to defeating these two existential enemies.
Okay, so in defeating jihad, I lay out a very simple three-part plan for defeating what I like to call the global jihadi movement, whether it's Shia or whether it's Sunni. Let's start with the basics. Number one, you have to eradicate politics from the threat assessment. No more politics, no more political correctness. The idea that the enemy says I'm a jihadi and I'm doing this for Allah, you don't get to wipe that out. You don't get to say, I'm uncomfortable with that concept, therefore I'm going to censor the transcript of the Orlando killer. No, get politics out of the threat assessment, just the facts, and specifically, be honest, like the president was, President Reagan. What did he say about the Soviets? He said, this is an evil empire. Well, if this isn't evil incarnate, killing children, beheading people, crucifying them, if that's not evil, then nothing's evil. So be honest about who we're facing and who they say they are. Second, if we look at ISIS specifically and Al-Qaeda, we have to understand we can't be the face of this war. So white-skinned or brown-skinned Christians or atheists or whatever can't be the face of this war. It has to be who? It has to be our Muslim allies. If we want to defeat ISIS, we want to have the Egyptians, the Jordanians, the Emiratis, and the Kurds as well come together to defeat and close with ISIS, because that will be the only credible victory. But as you know, working in the Middle East, I've worked in the Middle East for years, never going to happen unless those people believe we are on their side and we support them 100%. And unfortunately, we've shown them something in the last 7.5 years. We've shown them not to trust us. In Iraq, in Syria, and so forth. So the next commander-in-chief has to win back our Sunni allies in the region. And the last part of my book, and this goes to Iran as well, which is a slightly different enemy threat group, there is a connective tissue between Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS, and Adolf Hitler. There's a connective tissue between Al-Qaeda and Stalin. And what's that connective tissue? They're all totalitarians. Either you agree with them, or they will kill you or enslave you. So we have to ask the question, how do you best defeat totalitarianism? Well, how did we do it with the Soviet Union? We didn't blow up Moscow. What did we do? We delegitimized their message. We bankrupted their ideology. When President Reagan says, tear down this wall, he's destroying the legitimacy of the Marxist message. We have to do the same thing with jihad, whether it's Shia jihad or Sunni jihad. We have to use counter-propaganda tools to delegitimize the message, just as we did during the Cold War, and again, not with us standing up there and saying it, but by helping our allies in the region, whether it's the members of the Green Revolution in Tehran or whether it's the moderate Muslims of the region. We have to help them destroy the message of jihad.
Yeah. Dr. Gorka, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Up next, we head to Israel to see how the Israel Defense Forces are fighting back against the growing cyber terrorism threat. It's the Watchman. It's Christians United for Israel, only right here on TBN. Don't move. Israel's enemies are united in their goal to destroy the Jewish state. They all share one purpose: to wipe Israel off the map. Evil forces never stop working to isolate, delegitimize, and weaken Israel. In the face of evil, Christians must not remain silent. Supporting Israel is not a political issue, it is a biblical issue. And you can make a difference in your church, on college campuses, and on Capitol Hill.
In 10 years, you've gathered more than 3 million members and are active on more than 300 college campuses. Kufi never shies away from standing with Israel, from standing with the truth.
Become part of the largest pro-Israel organization in America and help Christians United for Israel push back against the darkness as a beacon of truth. Join over 3 million defenders of Israel when you visit our website at cufi.org and sign the Israel Pledge. Together, we'll make sure that Israel never stands alone. And welcome back to The Watchman, only right here on TBN. Well, terrorism takes many forms. It's not just guns and bombs. It also includes, these days, cyber terrorism. We recently traveled to Israel to get an up-close look from the Israel Defense Forces at how they are fighting back against this growing cyber terrorism threat. And folks, it was an eye-opener. Take a look.
The technology is now a major concept, a major lead in the battlefield. And in the last years, we're trying to keep changing the technology and keep adapting it in the battlefield.
To keep pace.
To keep pace, exactly.
Welcome to a simulation city, or a sim city for short. Now, this is a replica of a real city, And what the Israeli Defense Forces does is it trains its soldiers on how to defend against these various cyber threats that are popping up every day. And they use this model Sim City to do it. Now, this is literally a classroom that I'm standing in right now, and we will have an instructor from the IDF playing the role of hacker, of cyber hacker, and you'll have students at all of these desks around me in this classroom, and what they'll do is try to defend against these cyber attacks. And look at the rich target environment we have, folks. We have right here, this is a model of stock exchange, financial centers. You know that the likes of Iran, North Korea, rogue regimes around the world who have very strong cyber warfare and hacking capabilities would love to hack into financial centers and destroy the economies of countries in the West, countries like Israel as well. You have here a very scary scenario. You have a nuclear reactor. Now, God forbid a hacker could get into a nuclear reactor, cause horrific damage, obviously. You have a replica here in this Sim City of a neighborhood, just an average neighborhood, and hackers can touch not only the big targets, folks, like financial centers, like a nuclear reactor, which are obviously the main targets, but you can literally shut down life in a neighborhood, hack into a neighborhood, shut down the electricity, hack into people's computers throughout a neighborhood. Very scary scenario, and that's really gives you an image, a picture of how this can affect our daily lives. You have another neighborhood here that the IDF is practicing on defending in this Sim City. You have a train here. And folks, talk about a nightmare scenario. A cyber hacker can hack into the controls of a train.
My concerns is the cyber threat. As we are adding more and more technologies, we have to first figure out how to protect them, how to make them as less vulnerable as possible, and not to allow our enemies some gates or doors inside our network.
We have a satellite tower. Also, obviously, nightmare scenarios, cell phone coverage. We're all very reliant today on our iPhones, our cell phones. Hack into a cell phone tower. You have here a military base. Also, a lot of nasty possibilities there for the bad guys. Here we have a model of a power plant. Think back, folks, to Chernobyl, obviously, to 3 Mile Island, that disaster in the United States. If you can hack into these power plants, you can cause a real disaster in any Western city. We have here, again, an airplane runway. Hack into the satellite tower at an airport, affect that, cause a plane to go off the runway. So a lot of nasty scenarios today in the world, and a lot of rogue regimes. And by the way, terrorist organizations like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda have robust cyber warfare programs and cyber hacking programs. So the Israel Defense Forces is really trying to stay one step ahead of its enemies. And this looks pretty basic, the Sim City, but it is invaluable for training the soldiers of the IDF against these cyber threats. And I can assure you, every day there's a fleet of students in here. They're in front of their computers, young guys and girls in front of their computers, using this Sim City to great effect, with the ultimate goal of one day taking what they learn here, starting small here on this replica, and applying these in real life, on the battlefield and against real threats and in real time. Up next, my final thoughts on how you can be a watchman or woman for America, for Israel, for such a time as this. It's the Watchman, it's Kufi, only right here on TBN. Stick around. The Bible is clear. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob made an everlasting covenant with the land and the people of Israel. They are the apple of his eye. But Israel faces enemies on all sides who want to annihilate every Jewish man, woman, and child.
God gave us a voice and a responsibility, a biblical mandate to bless Israel and to speak up for Zion's sake. Find out how when you order my free book, Why Christians Should Support Israel.
You'll learn why Israel has a biblical and historic claim to the land, why Christians owe the Jewish people a spiritual debt, what the Bible says about those who bless and curse the Jewish people. There's no time to lose. Call Christians United for Israel at the number on your screen or go to cufi.org/book and we'll send you your free book from Pastor John Hagee. If you won't speak up for Israel, who will? And welcome back to The Watchman, only right here on TBN. Folks, I think this was one of the most important shows we've done here so far. And you probably noticed that one of the central themes was this: Israel's enemies and America's enemies are one in the same. You know, I think back 15 years to 9/11. During that same period, Israel was facing a brutal terrorist onslaught that became known as the Second Intifada, in which waves of suicide bombers murdered innocent Israelis. That was no coincidence. The same radical terrorist forces that want to take down America also want to destroy Israel. The Israelis are our first line of defense against terror on the very front lines in the Middle East. That's why it's so important for you to join with us here at Christians United for Israel, America's largest pro-Israel organization, as we stand up and speak out for America, for Israel, and for all that is good and true. You see the information there on your screen. Visit our website at cufi.org or give us a call. In the book of Ezekiel, the God of Israel says that if the watchman sees the enemy coming and does not sound the alarm to warn the people, he is responsible for their captivity. They will die in their sins, but God will hold the watchman responsible for their deaths. Folks, after today's show, you certainly have all the information you need to be a watchman or woman on the wall for such a time as this. Well, thanks for joining us this week on The Watchman. Until next time, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace.